up?
What up?
Mr. Coon. This is a different angle in your apartment. Have we seen this one before?
I figured I'd try to get more light from the windows.
No, it looks good.
Turn.
Yeah. You're shining. This is good.
I wore my Run DMC shirt.
Nice.
I thought you would wear your Run BTC shirt, and then
I thought about it.
Or just like show up in an Adidas tracksuit with your shell toes or something.
That would be funny.
Do you have any of your old get-ups?
The old clothing? No, I don't have any clothing.
Yeah.
Still have the equipment, turntables, and.
Do you really?
Oh yeah, yeah. Don't get rid of those.
Okay, we're busting them out at some point for the Teller launch party.
So what did you? Were they Techniques?
Oh yeah, Techniques
Nice.
1200s. Yeah, well they're in storage, but I have them. You know what I mean?
Okay, so when was the last time you used them?
Well, what do you mean by use? I mean, I would like practice.
Practice even.
Yep.
Yeah.
Years?
Oh yeah, like a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Oh wow. So you're pretty fresh. So if we do the Teller launch party, we could have Spinmaster C.
Spinmaster C, and then Blasco can be on guitar. We'll get everyone involved.
Oh, mixing guitar with turntablism.
Yeah. Well, that's like
often.
it'd be good. Like 2 feet. He's like he does like dubstep with his guitar soloing over top.
Have you ever been to any of the like local live shows where it's one person, but they use something called Ableton Live, which you can record loops with a foot pedal? So I saw one guy. He had he actually had a French horn, a bass, guitar, and then he would use one of those, those boxes you sit on and do the drums. So he would start with the drum loop, record that, and it would go in a loop. He'd bring out his French horn. He'd make some loop with that. Then he'd put a bass line to it, then a guitar, and then he'd sing over the whole thing. Just amazing.
Yeah.
So I started to do that with like DJ beats and loops and everything. So yeah, we could definitely do something like that.
Yeah, I had a loop pedal for a while with my guitar, and every time you would try and do more than one thing, it would always mess up because you do the drum loop first, and then you do the guitar loop on top, and then you're going to do something else over top of it. But unless they're perfectly synced, it slowly gets off. So by the end of the song, it just sounds awful.
Oh, now you know exactly what it's like to be a DJ. That's like the whole thing with mixing. It's like
and I could it's just me probably because my timing is slightly off. But
what do they call it? Like if it starts to go off, it's like called train wrecking or something like that. Like it just starts to sound like a train wreck real fast. Beats are just like
a good name.
Not lined up. Yeah,
I would just call it drifting, but
yeah. It drifts into a train wreck.
Okay, so we will begin the podcast. So we have with us Mike Coon. Mike, how did you go from Spinmaster C to blockchain developer? Can you walk us through this story? Because this is we know you pretty well, but there's still giant holes.
Wow, how did I go from hip-hop DJ to software developer? Well, I'm not sure how that transition happened. I can say that I was in the Air Force, and I dragged my DJ and recording gear around everywhere I went. So in Korea, I ran a small project studio making demo tapes for people, mostly hip-hop rappers. I would do the beats and the music, and they would do the lyrics.
Early K-pop.
Yeah. So then when I came back to the States, I was over there for 2 years and did that. Saved up some money, came back here, What was cool about DJing at that time was it was the early start of digital recording. So there was a company called DigiDesign that was a startup in Silicon Valley, and they made something called Pro Tools, which most studios had started using, but they also had a lower grade version of that called Deck, which was just, you can think of it almost like a little multi-track recorder, but it was digital. So anyway, I started to get into all of this, and that's really where I started to think about software. And I really would have, had I not been a language analyst or a translator in the Air Force, I probably would have gone a different direction with software. I think I would have been in the digital, signals processing kind of stuff, because it was really interesting to me, sampling in general. But anyway, then I came back to the States, and I was still doing recording, still into like digital, the signals processing, mostly on audio analysis. So spectral analysis was interesting to me because I was doing mastering. Like there were some guys in Virginia that would record, their tracks down there, and they would send me a tape, a digital DAT tape, DAT, digital audio tape of what they had, and they would want me to master it. So I started looking at spectral analysis software and how it would look at frequencies, and I could tell if it was well balanced, or if it was too much bass or too much of a particular frequency. The whole idea of mastering is to try to get the audio levels pretty flat, so that if it was on radio or earphones or whatever, the sound would be consistent. The idea is to get the spectral frequency spread to be as flat as possible. So anyway, this software that I was experimenting with would show me exactly what was going on, and that just fascinated the hell out of me. But anyway, so long story short, I was a translator at NSA while doing all this music stuff on the side.
And this was Korean you were speaking?
Correct. Yeah.
How did you learn Korean, by the way?
Yeah,
I did not know you could speak Korean. That's cool.
Yeah, Air Force language. I went to Monterey.
Okay, so they taught it to you.
Yeah, Defense Language Institute in Monterey. I was there for a year. It's basically 8 hours a day, nothing but Korean, native speaker teachers. And then I spent 2 years in Korea.
Nice.
So yeah, to me, language, there's an overlap between music and language. And people that are good with music tend to be good with natural languages because you're basically repeating tones. You're repeating sounds that have meaning.
Sure.
And so I picked up on Korean pretty easily. But then the syntax and the grammar side of it, I think, is where it really helped me on the software side, because software is nothing but syntax and grammar. It's just different language.
Right.
So there's some overlap. And that's what I was going to say, is when I was working at NSA as a translator, there were opportunities to automate some of the tasks of translation. So I learned how to write bash scripts for Unix. And one of the instructors for one of these shell scripting classes said, "Oh, you picked this up really fast. You should probably look at going into computer science." So that's what I did. I went to school part-time and finished a computer science degree, learned Java. And that's really where my career shifted away from the music side and more into the technology behind the music side and how do I write software. That's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, that was great. You didn't think you had a connection, but that was like an extremely, for me, that sounded like a very salient one-to-one connection. It makes perfect sense. I never really thought of it like connecting language learning, real language learning with I mean, I guess that's why we call it programming languages, because they are similar. I just never thought of it like that.
Yeah, the programming languages are actually easier, I think, because the grammar, there are hard and fast rules. It's either going to pass the compiler or not. Whereas natural language, I could start to create my own words, my own grammar patterns, even in English that's happening, the way.
Right, I before E except after C.
Well, sure, there's that, but
there's
even
like all these exceptions.
The example that I always use, it's a kind of a vulgar one, but abso-effing-lutely. Instead of just absolutely, all of a sudden we're injecting these phrases inside of what would normally be just just a word. Well, that's not natural English. That's evolved. That's something that's created just because of culture or whatever's happening at a sort of period in time. Computer languages don't really do that, right? It's sort of, well, this is the language. I mean, I guess they do in some sense. We add features to the language, but yeah, anyway.
Is there a slang equivalent in coding?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there? I guess shortcuts. You can create shortcuts. But anyway, I just think there's a lot of overlap in learning natural languages and learning computer languages.
Yeah, so you were trying to be lazy and automate your translation tasks, and you ended up being a Java programmer. That kind of backfired on you, didn't it?
Yeah, well, it was actually, I don't know, was it laziness? I don't know if it was laziness. It was too much work, not enough people.
Sure.
We had to figure out a way to automate what we were doing, or we would never have gotten them through all the material. So it was kind of it needed to be done sort of thing. And I could figure it out. Whereas my teammates, they were strictly like Korean.
Okay, well, and now there's still one other piece. So you're working at the NSA as a coder now. When did you make the switch, or when did you know you wanted to sort of jump ship?
Jump ship from music?
Well, you connected us from DJ to computer science.
Where's crypto?
Through software and
blockchain.
Then how do you get from NSA computer science?
Yeah, I mean, was this like just you saw the opportunity and you saw all these tech articles, so you wanted to make some money, or?
No, it wasn't that at all. So this is, I was there for 20 years as a contractor and as a government employee. And I guess I'm an idealist sometimes with certain things. And I see an overlap between creative music people or just creative artists in general and software developers. The process is very similar. It's all creation. It's all just, you have to be a creative thinker to write software, just like you have to be creative to write music and, create tracks. So I guess what I thought was, can I find a way to tap into the creative developer talent that's not working for the government and allow them to create things that the government needs without them actually having to be in the government spaces? Because, to be honest, it's a very different experience working in a large bureaucracy when you're a creative person. It's like your creative talent is not nurtured. It's sort of, no.
Suppressed.
Yes, it's sort of, you have to stay within the box because they just need you to maintain that box.
Because they can predict what that box will do over time.
Yeah, it's easier for budgeting and all of that.
Exactly.
I'm not critical of the process or why they do it. It's just it doesn't necessarily fit the personality of a truly creative developer. And in my opinion, the more creative the developer is, probably the more talented they are, and the more passionate they are about what they're doing. So what I was trying to find was a way to bridge those two worlds. And, I was reading a lot about like the gig economy, short-term tasks versus a W-2 job sort of situation, and how that trend is evolving. And what kept coming up was blockchain, because the two seem to overlap quite a bit. Like blockchain is all about, bottom-up, peer-to-peer value distribution. What you put in is what you would get back. The system sort of reflects value back to what I put in. Well, that's what the gig economy is about. Look, I want to own, or I own my car. I want to drive for Uber. That's like on me. What I put in is what I'm going to get back. There are no gatekeepers. There's no one saying that I can and can't do this in blockchain. It's just sort of a wild, wild west sort of scenario. So that's what got me involved, and sort of as soon as I started reading about it, it really resonated with me because, when I was doing music as a teenager and trying to, we're going to get a record deal, and we were down in Miami talking to these labels, and it was just, hey, let's make this happen. There were gatekeepers, and it was all about, what did you look like? How old were you? What kind of music? Does it sound like the Cracker Jack stuff that's out there? And if it doesn't, then we don't want it because we can't sell it. And I felt like the gatekeeper mentality was kind of like this mob run thing. You're in only if they let you in. And blockchain breaks that. There are no gatekeepers. You can literally exchange value and interact with and transact with people just because they like what you're doing. To me, that's a more natural, truly, market-driven environment. And that's what really attracted me to the tech.
Sure. And then did you buy crypto first, or did you start developing first?
No, I started developing first.
And look at you.
Yeah. And I'm a practical person. I don't. Sometimes what bothers me about crypto and blockchain is, one, the two overlap too much, meaning every time I bring up blockchain to my old enterprise development colleagues, the first thing they go to,
price.
Bitcoin. It's a scam. All these tokens and ICOs are scamming people. They look at only the crypto side. They're not looking at how can I apply this tech in different ways to bring about security where there is none. How do we get to what is ground truth about whatever? And some of the examples I use, there's some services at NSA that sort of control access to systems, and the way it's done, it's very like single point of failure kind of scenario where when that thing goes down, all bets are off. You can't use anything because it's the only place that you have to go to certify access. Well, that sounds like a great opportunity to put blockchain to basically take that access database and push it out to the edges and distribute it using an immutable data store, which is what it's all about. But they don't make that connection because all they're looking at is the crypto. So what I wanted to do in the beginning was, don't look at the crypto. Let's look at what is blockchain's real capability? How can I apply it in real life? What's real right now? What can I do within the next 3 to 6 months? And then maybe have a vision for what's maybe a year out. That's how I like to look at it. And if I can't solve a problem with it within a few weeks of looking at the tech, I'm probably going to move on and look for something else.
So that said, you must have solved a problem with it because you haven't moved on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So what was like the first thing you started to build, or,
Yeah, so I'm a data guy. That's what I did at NSA. I was analytics, high volume and high variety of data. We basically built the equivalent of Google Analytics. They didn't have that inside, and you have to keep in mind that NSA's network is isolated. They don't connect to the outside world. So it's a massive intranet, and there are many, many applications. Well, internally, they weren't looking at the applications for insights about usage, value, like, you know, you're spending all this money to maintain this thing, but what is its actual value to the mission? They weren't making that connection. So I basically wrote a platform just like Google Analytics. This was when cloud was, and MapReduce and everything was just getting started. So I basically put together something we called tool metrics, a very literal name for what it was. You basically instrument your app, and it reveals how it's being used, who's using it, how often is it used. So coming from that world, I came to the outside and started playing with blockchain, and I thought, well, I didn't see at the time anyone looking at analytics for blockchain apps, for dApps, Ethereum app, smart contract. So we put together something we call Smart Contract Monitor. It's still out there. It basically can monitor, given an address, it will tell you like all the transactions that took place, all the failures, how much gas is used, you know, who were the most common callers, that kind of thing. But the vision was, could we build something to give dApp developers insight about how their dApp is being used in the wild? Since then, several other efforts or projects have stood up, and I think the best one out there so far is Alethio, ALETH.io, I think.
Alethio.
Yeah, it's a consensus project.
Yep.
And they just released something recently where they have an API for you to query all the transactions and events for contracts. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen. You know, and I know you guys talked to Jay Rush. His approach is to make sure that the data is always available so that anyone can run their own analytics and understand what's happening in the ecosystem. And I think that's very important for transparency.
Yeah.
You know, one of the insights that I was sort of taken aback was daily there's almost $700,000 worth of gas wasted on failed transactions. That's a lot of money just being sort of leaked from the system because of who knows what. You know, there are various reasons why things fail, obviously, you know, not enough gas, or, you know, a requirement in the smart contract says, you know, you can't, you know, it doesn't pass the require statement, those kind of things. But it seems like the tooling could be a little bit smarter about, like, don't submit the transaction if it's going to fail.
Yeah, especially if it's like a require statement, you can really ahead of time.
So, but anyway, those are the kind
of. Is that a UI issue?
Is it a UI issue?
Is that something that's just like?
Well, I think a lot of it is what probably happening on like decentralized exchanges and decentralized finance, where people are sort of racing for something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think, you know, so like if in a 0x relayer, you and I both are trying to get the same trade, one of us is going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, those are fine. It's the ones that run out of gas. That seems ridiculous to me. Why?
Because you can predict it.
Yes. Why would you submit it if you know it's just going to be a waste? That's just terrible. So those kind of scenarios.
You need the little clippy guy to pop up in the screen.
Someone needs to warn you. Say, hey. But just not MetaMask, because that hides itself in the background. That's no good.
Do you think MetaMask needs just better tooling around it? Or do you think you'll have eventually something else that'll pop up?
I think eventually it's going to be baked into the browsers. You know, Opera recently announced that they're putting wallets that are native to the browser itself.
Well, I mean, you have Brave.
Yeah.
But maybe a Google Chrome or...
Yeah, I think if it's a native API, in the browser itself, then the browser is going to natively handle notifying the user instead of making it a plugin, which to me, you're taking the user experience out of band from the actual app. All of a sudden they have to worry about this other thing. I think just it takes away from the experience overall.
Sure. Well, I mean, I know you're talking like analytics and some of this stuff, but do you think the space is there yet where we need this? Like, are there enough users on these things? Like, how many users are you actually really seeing in a lot of these apps? And are they the kind of people that, because you sort of have this, because some people say that, oh, well, it is only developers and kind of, ETH maximalists say at the moment that are using these things. Like, don't they know better to begin with? If it's a bunch of us developers who are down there coding in, the terminal with you, isn't that kind of our own fault?
No, I agree with you. I think the bulk of the community is still developers. And from what we see in our data and analytics, I would say about anywhere between 8 and 12%-ish of all dApps dominate 98% of the transactions. So it's interesting that even though you have, like, we get about 1,500 new dApps deployed, or smart contract addresses deployed daily, but they're in the noise. The bulk of the traffic is essentially a few major players, CryptoKitties, IDEX, EtherDelta, Fork Delta. Those are the big transactions, and they have 30 to 40,000 unique users. So,
oh wow,
I mean, there are a lot of players, but we're not in the millions. So
sure.
You're right. Is there justification for an analytics platform to understand those few customers? Maybe. I would say that the real, I don't know, this is just me talking. I think the real future of mainstream adoption needs to happen when we bridge traditional web apps with blockchain. Somehow those two need to interface. And that both worlds need each other. They might not admit it, but traditional apps need blockchain, and blockchain still needs traditional infrastructure. So somehow creating
a
layer of middleware.
Like people using Ethereum to pay for things, you mean, or something different?
More that both sides trigger activity in the other. So if something happens on-chain, trigger something off-chain. If something happens off-chain, trigger something on-chain. Here's an example. Loyalty point systems. We keep talking about them and how, one day you'll be able to trade, air miles on one airline with air miles on another because it's all going to be blockchain. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, why don't we make that real? If I purchase something on a site, why can't I airdrop tokens to the person in response to that purchase? Now, that has nothing to do with like traditional e-commerce, but you're bringing in blockchain element to it. That's easy. It's just a loyalty point thing. I get these tokens, and there was that investor in Berlin, Elad. I forget his last name.
Elad Verbin.
Yes.
We're going to try and get him on, so you have to.
Yeah, so he actually had a brilliant idea. He said, why is it that if you did something like this, I make a purchase, I buy some flowers for my mom for Mother's Day. Flowers, 1-800-flowers.com gives me 100 tokens. And what they do is they let me bet with those tokens. And what I'm betting on is which flower is going to sell the best. You get two things out of that. One, it's almost like this gaming thing where I'm earning these tokens, these flower tokens that I might use later to buy more flowers, but they're also getting a survey result.
You're getting insights.
More likely, I'm essentially voting and telling them which flower I think is going to be the most popular. So they get something, I get something. That's what Elad was talking about. that you could use these loyalty point systems for more than just rewards. If you turn it into a game situation, you could also get it like survey, because nobody answers surveys, but I might use those tokens to bet if I can double it or whatever. It's just an interesting approach. But that's what I mean. I think mainstream might adopt blockchain when it's hidden. It's sort of behind the scenes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's always just one of those things like, you know, how do you sort of incentivize people to use these open networks versus just kind of building their own centralized system where they can capture everything? Yeah. It's kind of in the short, like it's, you almost see this kind of game theory problem where, you know, if everyone does it, the benefits are huge. But if you're the one flowers.com person that wastes all this money to move just your system to Ethereum, then it's like pointless almost.
Yes.
So then how do you like convince people to move? And, you know, is there maybe a role? Like, I would love your thoughts too, because I know you've kind of talked with people about grants and things like that. You know, like what's the role of kind of the Ethereum Foundation and other grant programs to push this kind of narrative forward to get over that hump?
I don't know. I don't know if it's their role or maybe it is.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow to convince companies that currently have a loyalty system are paying a lot of money to maintain those systems. So is there cost saving in migrating to something more, general, that's Ethereum based, let's just say? So should the foundation create that? Possibly. I don't know. I feel like their role is more on making sure that the Ethereum infrastructure can be generalized, can be used for multiple scenarios. You know, is the speed there? Is the security there? Do people trust it? Are the APIs clean, clear, understandable? You know, some of the roadblocks I think right now for developers is just the moving parts and the moving the moving foundation. You know, when I was in Berlin for you guys, what was that? That was 4 weeks, basically. Web3 changed 3 times in 4 weeks. And two of the changes were breaking. It would no longer work. I had to completely change how I was interacting with the APIs. That's not acceptable for mainstream adoption.
I mean, technically Web3 isn't Ethereum even, is it? It's like
yeah, that's a good point.
You're parity. Right. So, you know, we should be grateful for their tools, I guess.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Should the Ethereum Foundation continue to let the parity maintain something that's the only window from
everyone's using, right?
I don't know about that, you know, because I think we had talked about the sort of conflict of interest between Web3, parity, Infura, consensus, like all of them are like competing. Okay, MetaMask, where does MetaMask fit into all of this? I
mean, this was sort of the discussion we had with Jay as well. You know, whenever you're talking, for him, it's all about you need more people to run nodes. Mm-hmm. So, like, how do you incentivize that? Do you actually have to pay people to do something, or for their own benefit, or will people like naturally do things that make sense, just because they believe in the space? And you know, we sort of agreed to disagree at the end. He thinks that people will come together and run nodes.
That's very optimistic.
He's very, very optimistic about it all. Whereas I was maybe a little bit more pessimistic on the side of, you know, we're going to need to incentivize people.
Did he talk to you about the analogy of your cable box today?
No, please explain.
Him and I talked at ETH Denver, and back and forth, we came to the realization that what we're seeing today with these Ethereum in a box or blockchain in a box kind of solutions, dev node or dApp node, those kind of things.
Yep.
How are they any different to how the modem evolved? So early days of internet, you buy the stupid 56K modem, you know, its thing, and it would connect to the internet. But that's something that I had to specifically set up, separate from everything else, connected to my phone line, do all that. But what happened? Over time, that capability was essentially baked into my cable box.
Right.
And now I've got Fios, so I've got my router, my Wi-Fi router. I don't even mess with it. It's like in a closet somewhere. Always on, always there, always connectable. So the question is that eventually going to be blockchain? Is my node, my personal home, like blockchain enclave, going to be accessible through something very similar to a cable box? And I think that's what Jay is getting at, is that, today he has to buy this separate dApp node thing, but eventually it's just going to be there.
No, but I think that's sort of the question is like, why would you buy a cable box if you could get TV without buying a cable box? You know, like, because right now, like, you sort of are forced to do it because you want the internet and you want all these channels. But like with a node, you can just use Infura. You know, you can just use some other service. Or,
yeah, but you still have to connect to the internet.
Sure.
You need a gateway.
Do you need that? Do you need that though for Ethereum?
Well, you have to talk to the other nodes, right? Somehow you have to connect to the network. Right,
but why aren't people, you know, like right now, like I just use Infura for everything. So like, why would I ever go and buy my own?
It's not that you would buy your own. It's that whatever you buy to connect to the internet
would already be doing it.
Okay. It's already doing it.
Yeah, it's just a no-brainer. You have it already.
Yeah, it's baked in. It's part of the network. And you have your own personal key, your own personal wallet, then that's set up inside of your own little Wi-Fi network, right? But to the outside world, this box takes care of interacting with both blockchain, internet. It's all one thing.
Okay.
It's seamless. And I think there's actually...
and then hopefully we won't have to rely on Verizon. We can...
Exactly.
Or we still have to rely on Verizon.
Well, you need some gateway to the internet.
Yeah.
Right. Something's got to get you on the network. So that's always going to be there. Cisco is actually working. They have job postings right now for blockchain engineers. So I suspect that Cisco is somehow working on some kind of blockchain router,
cool.
which would then evolve, I think, into the cable providers actually baking it in, and you're just always able to connect to. I think the challenge right now for all of them is which network.
Well, do you think
that's connect with?
Do you think that's a bad thing for the space though? You know, because like I know with your current, you know, my internet provider, I know that if you try and download illegal movies, you can get a warning from your internet provider.
There was an attempt.
Yeah, like someone on your Wi-Fi tried to do this, and you're like, "Oh, I had no idea." So, like, is that like a bad thing? Like, could you see, like, in the future, like maybe securities laws, for instance, being enforced through Verizon and Google? Isn't that like the downfall to all this? Like, how do we want that? That's my question.
I guess I'm talking at a lower level. So before internet was internet, you had all these separate networks that spoke different protocols until TCP came along and sort of created a standard way to connect to any of them. That's what I'm referring to. Like, okay, if Cisco is doing this, are they speaking Ethereum node protocol? Are they speaking Bitcoin? How are they interacting with the blockchain network? So until that becomes standard, I think they're hesitant to move and make anything real because there is no standard.
Libra.
Libra. That would be very sad.
Well, I think they have some telecom companies on board, don't they?
Yes. Yeah, they do.
Yep. And their little cohort of friends.
Yeah, and maybe they think that's the vision. Like, could they basically become the standard way of interacting with smart contracts? I don't know, maybe. But to your point, it is dangerous when any provider becomes yet again that gatekeeper to say you can or can't do this or that. Yeah, that's going to be a problem. But then I go back to you just need more competition. So Verizon will have their box, which has its filters. Comcast will have theirs, or whoever. Right? There might be a new provider that's completely decentralized in some way. I don't know. I guess an example might be LivePeer. So they do the video broadcasting thing, and if you have a phone, you could basically broadcast, and then they incentivize nodes to rebroadcast the images and the video.
Yeah,
maybe something like that, where the community steps up and they are the gateway. So you basically pay a toll fee to connect to the internet wherever you are, something like that. I think a whole new economy could come out of all of this, and that to me is what's most fascinating. It's this big giant social engineering experiment. How do we get people to do what we want them to do, and not do what we don't want them to do? It's just fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember the first conversation we ever had. I think it was whenever you were talking about your music idea, just the sort of like flipping the music industry on its head. And, all of this sort of bakes it back into so how do you incentivize people to almost do things for their own benefit? And do you have to pay them, and do you have to do that? Because I think right now you would, from kind of developing with you a little bit, you would say that really the big pain points in all of this are the centralized portions of Ethereum, whether it's MetaMasks or Infuras, and dealing with all that. How do you think that's going to play out? Do you think you're going to see Microsoft get on board, and then you'll have, I don't know if Microsoft's a good example for better developer tools, but something like that?
I certainly feel like there's going to be more Infuras being stood up. Whether that's a good thing or not, I mean, on the plus side, competition breeds excellence. So if someone comes out with something better than Infura, then Infura has to step up their game and do something different. But it also creates more options. And I think that's what's important. It's not necessarily that it's centralized, it's that there are more options. The thing that bothers me about cloud today is that there are really only three players: Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, right?
Sure.
There are a bunch of other smaller ones, DigitalOcean, and Rackspace even has cloud offering, but I feel like it's still pretty much dominated by the top three. So whatever they're doing, everyone else is sort of just doing the same thing. So is that industry going to evolve any? Are we going to see any great innovation coming out of it? Maybe. It's hard to say. So if we look at Infura and what they're doing, and I think they're doing an outstanding job of supporting a network of, hundreds of thousands of applications. They do 10 billion events a day or something. I mean, that kind of infrastructure, one, is really expensive to run, and two, very hard to maintain. So the fact that they're doing both, paying the cost and maintaining it, says a lot about, the talent that team must have. I think the challenge is answering to a community that wants to be decentralized, yet everything goes through Infura. How do you make that argument? I mean,
Yeah.
To be honest, some of my enterprise Java people they use that as the very example of, well, it's all bullshit because, hey, you claim it's decentralized, but you got one company that'll shut the whole thing down. Not to mention that company runs all their infrastructure on Amazon. So how is that decentralized?
I mean, they're right.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like you always hear, Nouriel Roubini, or if you ever watch those anti-crypto people, they always talk about it like Bitcoin centralized because there's, 3 miners, and then Ethereum centralized because you have basically a few mining pools and mainly these giant choke points whenever it comes to, and everything as far as like dApps. Like, are dApps even truly decentralized at the moment? They're all still these websites with, known parties who operate them and with giant choke points as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm hopeful.
Isn't decentralization is always kind of like a moving scale? It's always in comparison to what came before. It's like a step less centralized than what came before it. You could always say it's more centralized than what will come next too, So I don't know. I think in some way you could always argue that what current level of decentralization is centralized. What do I want to say? Like, for instance, you have three main miners on Bitcoin. Well, that's more decentralized than one. You could always make that argument that at least we're moving towards something less in the control of, the previous powers that be. So I don't know.
As long as that statement is true, there's always this lingering question if consensus is an evil empire, or are they really like this DAO, organization that's really about not being in control of the user data, not being in control of access. We don't know. Well, so far, they've been a pretty good citizen in terms of supporting Ethereum and making sure everybody can access it. And they're paying a lot of money to make sure that whole network, or Infura in particular, stays up. So, but sometimes I still wonder, like, what's the revenue model? At some point, somebody's got to make money, or,
yep.
I mean, what are they doing? And I think Infura has said several times in a couple articles that they really don't want to be doing what they're doing, but it's a necessary evil right now. But I don't know what the alternative is. More people to run nodes. Actually, I talked to the Parity CTO out in Berlin at one of the AMAs, and he said that what they're trying to do is make light node to incentivize people to run full nodes and be access points for more light nodes. They think that that's the solution. So you get away from Infura, and instead your dApp is essentially running a light node in the browser, which then connects to one of thousands of people running these full nodes. I think VIP Node is a company doing that right now, but I don't know what the status is. So can we break that whole thing apart? Maybe, but we've got to write more friendly, usable stuff to run in the client, and I don't see that yet.
Yeah, I mean, well, kind of going back to your like cloud days, at the beginning there were a lot of like little cloud players, you could say. It was like, it wasn't this run by 3 companies. Or was it?
No, it wasn't. In fact, most people run their own data center.
Yeah. And, even like whenever you were running web servers, like everything was sort of decentralized. And then it sort of got pushed into almost laziness and just kind of costs, efficiencies of scale.
That's what drove it. I mean, I don't know if laziness was it, but the fact that everyone had in-house system admins, database administrators, all the stuff to run your own little data center, that was really expensive. Plus the cost of the servers, power, and everything else. It just didn't make sense economically when you looked at, well, shit, I could just amortize that with everyone else on this Amazon cloud, and as long as they're protecting my data and access to it, well, I could do that for 1/10 of the cost. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, so how does Ethereum get to the point where, because I would say Ethereum's still at the point where you need a database admin in-house, or like an Ethereum admin if you're going to be actually using that.
If you run your own node, you're going to need a DevOps, at least one person. So, I think that's why everybody just falls back and uses Infura. Why wouldn't you? It's free. Other than performance, because they have so much volume of traffic, sometimes it does get a little bit slow. But I guess it depends on the situation, even for Teller, today TellerScan has to go back and get a bit of history, and that takes some time to load. So, something we were working on was a caching mechanism, which would snapshot a window of data so that when the dApp loads, it bootstraps itself with this snapshot of historical data first, and then reads the latest data, which is a typical middleware technique of, you archive the oldest, you put like a window of data in a sort of a more speedy, accessible archive, and then you have like the last hour of data in memory. So
right.
It's a very similar technique. But point is that those kind of tools, they're not part of the ecosystem. They're not part of the APIs. You sort of have to roll those yourself. So to your point, anybody that's getting involved and is serious about writing a good user experience dApp, you're going to need a team of people to basically maintain the infrastructure right now.
Definitely.
Even with
and that's not a no-brainer. I mean, there's no economic incentive to do that. You'd have to have a sense of principles for you to want to do that.
So this comes back to the analytics. You would need to know when that's necessary. So unless you're watching how many users are adapting, and it's almost, if you think about it, it's kind of, I don't know what the word is, but you're in this position as a early stage Ethereum dApp development project where, okay, you build your dApp, you want to be completely decentralized, so you rely on Infura. New user comes to the site. First, it has to go and download a bunch of data to give them the historical perspective of the dApp, whatever's going on in it. And that takes a bit of time to bootstrap, depending on, how much data we're talking about. But that's the paradox. The more users you have, the more transactions you have, the longer it's going to take to actually load the app. Which means the more popular your app is, the less usable it is. So something has to watch, somehow the team has to watch, like, okay, where's that breaking point? At what point should we consider doing our own infrastructure, creating an index for ourselves, having a back-end infrastructure? But as soon as they do that, the community pipes up. Wait a minute, that's centralized. What are you doing? Now you're the gatekeeper of the data. And
right.
I feel like there's this circular argument, but maybe there's some confusion around what we mean by decentralized. And I think that's what you were talking about. I mean, like,
when is it enough?
Yeah. Like, centralized means there's no other way to get the data. But in this case, that's not what's happening. It's simply a cache.
Right.
But you have to have in order to have a great user experience. And, CryptoKitties, good example. It's not that CryptoKitties is the data around transactions related to CryptoKitties is publicly available, right? It's what we use all of the time as sort of a benchmark. But the part that's CryptoKitties is centralized, of course, is the image data, the sort of the metadata around what a cat looks like. That part is centralized. So they're kind of this hybrid.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's like this, this dichotomy between, great UX is what's needed to grow the space, but you really need pure decentralization. And it's like those two are almost just at odds with each other. Like you can't have great, like you look at like the more private a coin or the more anything a coin is secure, it's like just worse user experience. And then the same goes with dApps. Like if you're actually going to try and be decentralized, say like, an Augur really, I would say tries, it's like just awful UX and then they get slammed for it. But like which ones I guess are getting the users, which ones, Can you
imagine a crowdsourced UX or something like where you just let the whole community sort of vote pixel by pixel of what shows up on the UI UX? It would end up looking like, I don't know if you remember that Reddit artwork where like the entire community like painted together this crazy artwork. And it was just this, and it was live updated. And it was like a battle of like penises and like random memes taking over. And yeah, so to your point, like it would be terrible. It'd be a complete mess.
So that's sort of what the dApp space feels like. A bunch of random penises competing.
But what you're describing is actually might be the solution. And what I mean is, if you leave it up to the user of the dApp, so you go to the site and it basically says, hey, we're going to give you a choice. You can be completely decentralized, not rely on us. You go to the network and get the data, but it'll take a little bit to load. Are you okay with that? Or
sure.
Do you want to use our data and sort of bootstrap your experience so that you can use it within the next 10 seconds? Let them decide. That in itself is going to be completely different than what like today's centralized experience is, where you don't have a choice.
Sure.
If you have an Android phone and you don't connect it to Google services, that thing is a rock.
Yeah.
It does nothing. Right? So that's the difference.
Yeah, for me,
it suddenly has choices.
Right. I think that is when you have enough decentralization, when you just have the choice. It doesn't have to be the elimination of It's not like a takeover. The world is decentralized. There's no longer any centralized options or need for that. It's just the choice.
Yeah, I think that's the critical piece.
Yeah.
And it depends on the user, right? Some people, they're not going to want to wait 15 minutes for this thing to sync up with the network. The hell with that. Just download and let's go. Fine. That's one kind of user. Then the other one, no, I don't want anything to do with centralization. You're not getting my data. I know you're tracking me and all that crap. Nope. Yep. I'm going to the network. Leave it up to them.
That's good.
It's like sometimes you want the centralized news that has spied on you, and it makes it really easy to see the headlines that you probably want to actually see versus, you know what I mean? Even though you might not want to admit it, you want to be in your bubble, right? But to have the option to go somewhere else where it's like chaos and you have to fight through the penises to find the true, non-fake news, I want to have the option to do that.
Exactly. Because that's the beauty of it. We're all different. We all have different preferences. And some people, going back to the music thing, the reason that these streaming platforms are so popular is because the music's curated. I mean, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
90+% of the music that's produced in the world sucks. It's just people who think they're talented and they're not. So these platforms curate down to that 10%, and that's what people are paying for. But there are those in the world that were like, no, I want an unfiltered access to all of it. and I'm going to be the person to go in and find that
self-curate.
nugget.
Yeah. I want to build my own playlists.
Exactly.
Then you have the Pandora people that just wants to type in, some generic band and then just have it given to them.
Exactly.
And we have to admit, I mean, it's the majority of us are the Pandora people. Don't want to think, don't want to self-curate.
Well, it's a matter of time, Like, we don't have the time to curate at all. So it's just distill it down for me, damn it. I just listen to something.
Decentralized music curation. We can kick it off.
Oh, for sure.
It's like sort of like YouTube. That's, I mean.
Okay, so what would you get?
Yeah.
What would your thought experiment about decentralized Pandora? How would that be better? Like, what's your vision for that?
Well, I mean, I guess the only way it would actually be better would be you're assuming that. I don't think Pandora is really trying to censor anybody's tastes. So, you could have like some sort of censorship resistance in there. Not that that
would be the thing for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
it would be provable that it's feeding you your actual taste based off of your identity and not what they think you should be. That would be the difference.
Yeah. But I mean, you're assuming I think music's like probably a bad thing for that, just because I don't think Pandora just wants you to sit there and listen all day. They don't care. If you want to listen to nothing but Black Flag, they'll play it all day.
Yeah, and you would never be exposed to anything new.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just like, I don't know, but I think that comes into more of like the philosophical discussion, like, like whenever you are listening to different kinds of music, it might not be what you're most likely to click like on, but is sort of sitting through that unpleasant time a little bit, is that sort of beneficial to you in the long run? Or do you want some of that in the long run? And that would be, like maybe you do want to make the conscious decision to listen to various kinds of music, even if like you definitely wouldn't click like on this if it came up after your Taylor Swift song.
That's just two different types of people. Some people like the discovery, or they're called seekers. Like there's like a personality type. Some people are seekers and some people really, really aren't. And the seekers of the world sort of can have the patience to sit through that discovery process where you go through 5 songs that were like, meh, and that led you to a new genre of music that you never experienced, and now you love it. So
let's think about, like, what is a record label today? What do they do?
Promotions.
Promotion is a big one, but the most influential part of a label are the A&R reps, artist and repertoire. They're the people that go out and they find and discover new talent and bring them onto the label. Those are the gatekeepers. If you could take that role...
They're like the scouts.
Yeah. You can take that role and decentralize it. And now, instead of following artists per se, you're essentially following the A&R reps that have similar interests or tastes. So you're able to discover everything that they're discovering, but it's not just one. Like you could have, it's essentially you're following these A&R.
That's like subscribing to a playlist on Spotify because you know you like that guy's taste.
Yeah, basically.
Let him do the discovering for you because you discovered him.
But the incentive here is that A&R rep would normally work for a label and get percentages or salary. In this ecosystem, they would basically be stakeholders in these artists that they promote. So they would earn a part of their revenue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that's similar to like YouTube subscriptions. Like I subscribe to a bunch of like random YouTube people who curate music videos, but the problem with that is then, like if it becomes a really popular channel, then artists pay to get their music put on there.
Yeah.
And then there's like this negative thing where they probably wouldn't have clicked that video, but the artist paid Put it on there.
Okay, so here's the difference.
Okay.
You're locked into that channel. Once you subscribe, right?
Okay.
In this world, if you see that this person starts choosing just shit that you just don't like because they were paid, well, then you stop paying for the stream or whatever. You know what I mean? I guess you could do the same, but are you locked into a subscription period with YouTube?
No, you just unsubscribe.
You just unsubscribe.
Yeah. Speaking of which, people should click the subscribe button.
Yes.
On your
Click like and subscribe. You won't be locked in, but we'll be watching you.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a space that's definitely ripe for disruption, and many people have talked about it. There was a music conference I went to in San Francisco in October 17, where there was all this. By far, the largest complaint in the audience about the industry is streaming. People want to pay the licensing fees. They're okay with paying for streaming, but the licensing is so complicated that they can't figure out who to pay and what to pay.
Sure.
So they're like, you got to fix this. We need like one way to pay the artist. And nobody had a solution. Because lawyers and everything want to have their mentality. And there was a panel where there were two reps from Sony Music and I forgot the other, and one of the major labels. And their take was that, you know, streaming is not as popular as we like to think. They still think radio is by far the most popular way to discover music. And there were two other people on the panel that said, well, if that were the case, we wouldn't be at a music tech conference. We'd be at a frickin' radio conference. That's not true.
Maybe.
Because they want to maintain their existing system. That's been the case all along, right? And even with MP3s, they were up in arms about it because it was disrupting their revenue model and their distribution model. So
that'll die as soon as the cars become more preloaded. Just like with XM, these cars they all became preloaded with a free year of XM, and and XM took off for CD players, whatever it is. Once people buy their next gen car, they're going to have Apple CarPlay. They're going to have these things where your Spotify is as easy to turn on in your car as the radio.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I do right now with Amazon Prime. It's on my phone. I just plug it in. And do it. Yeah. It's just interesting that I guess the labels are still trying to hold on to their old infrastructure and their old way of doing business. And even in that infrastructure, in that scenario, the people that are consuming their product, people that are using streaming music, don't know how to pay them. So there's this huge disconnect. Like, the labels don't think that that's a revenue source that they should pay attention to. And the people out here are saying, look, I want to do more with it, but you're not making it possible for me to do. So something in between those two worlds, I think, is going to evolve. And, Spotify being one of these Libra Foundation members, maybe they have a vision for this.
Sure.
Because I think they've been losing money quite a long time on streaming.
Sure. Well, I mean, you get the users, everybody. That's the new strategy on how to grow a company. You lose a whole bunch of money for a long time, and then you leave. Capture users. It's all about that. But I think we wrapped around to music, and we're over an hour already.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to touch on? Any words of wisdom for the young crypto developers?
Words of wisdom?
Music recommendations?
Yeah. Ooh.
My recommendations are going to be old school, man.
Okay.
This is great. We'll end the video with it. We'll put it up.
Well, I was telling you guys the best streaming source I found is the Amazon Prime 90s hip hop channel station or whatever. Oh man,
They do it right.
so yeah.
All right, cool.
All right, well, thanks guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, that was awful advice for young crypto developers. He has no words of wisdom for you.
No, that's not true. Words of wisdom for blockchain, new people coming to the space. Focus on what's doable.
Sure.
Ignore the hype. Like, get in the code, actually play around with the APIs and see what you can and can't do. Because even the music streaming thing, there was so much hand waving around. Oh, we're gonna use blockchain to control access to streams. No, you can't, because the stream is just out in the open. You can't store data. Anyway, so look at the actual APIs and get in there and actually play with stuff. That's what I would say.
Cool.
Here it is.
Thank you.